One of the best documented cases of a poltergeist, nicknamed Old Geoffrey, occurred at the old rectory in Epworth, Lincolnshire. In 1716, something entirely out of the ordinary invaded the parsonage, and the family endured a 2-month nightmare. Despite the events being chronicled centuries ago, it remains a disturbing account of a poltergeist incident. Epworth Rectory is a Queen Anne-style building, rebuilt in 1709, which has been restored and is now the property of the Methodist Church of Great Britain, who maintain it as a museum. It was home to the rector of Epworth, and from 1697 till 1735, the Reverend Samuel Wesley, his wife Susanna, and their many children lived here. Their son John Wesley grew up to be the founder of Methodism. On the 9th of February 1709, while the Wesleys were resident, a fire burnt down the wooden rectory, and it was rebuilt in brick. Many believe the fire was started deliberately by local people who were attempting to drive out the Wesleys from Epworth for good, but there is no proof of this. The locals did all they could to try and force the Wesleys from the village. They sabotaged the crops and livestock that the family had to supplement their income and refused to pay the tithes they owed Samuel. Samuel Wesley did not ingratiate himself to the people of Epworth. The locals were hostile to anyone who was a royalist, a Tory, or an academic, and Samuel was all three. According to Samuel's son, John, the poltergeist activity began around 10 o'clock at night on the 2nd of December 1716, when a servant named Robert Brown, whilst sat in the dining room, heard several dismal groans, followed by strange knocking, usually 3 or 4 knocks at a time. He opened the front door, but found nobody outside. This happened twice more, which he felt was unusual. This continued for a fortnight, and knocking was heard in various parts of the house, but most frequently in the nursery. Robert believed this was the work of a local troublemaker, Mr. Turpin, who might have thrown stones at the house. He and some of the other servants retired to their quarters, and as Robert came to the top of the stairs, he and another servant named Nanny Marshall was stunned to see a handmill turning by itself. Nanny Marshall described hearing blood-curdling groans that caused the upstarting of her hair and made her ears prick forth at an unusual rate. Shocked but tired, Brown went to bed, but awoke in the night to the sounds of footsteps running up and down the stairs, an inexplicable sound that mimicked a turkey gobbling next to the bedstead and other noises, as if someone had fallen down the stairs. He became convinced that as he had opened the front door, something sinister had got into the rectory. Robert also heard a sound as though someone was walking over his shoes and boots next to his bed, even though his footwear was actually downstairs in the hallway. The next day, he and the maid related these incidents to another maid, who laughed at their antics and replied, "What a couple of fools are you? I defy anything to frighten me." She continued with her chores, one of which was to churn butter in the dairy. As she worked, she heard loud knocking on the dairy shelf, first above the shelf and then below. She grabbed a candle and searched both sides of the shelf, but couldn't find the source of the knocking. This frightened her so much, she screamed, dropped the tray of butter, and ran away. The following evening, between 5 and 6 o'clock, a daughter named Molly, who was around 20 years old, was sat at the dining table reading when she heard the door that led into the hallway open and the sound of a person walking in, adorned in a silk gown that rustled and trailed across the floor. This invisible figure seemed to walk around Molly, then it walked back to the door, then back to circle Molly once more. She stated, "It signifies nothing to run away, for whatever it is can run faster than me." So she rose, put her book under her arm, and walked slowly away. After supper, Molly was talking to her older sister Suki in one of the bedchambers. Molly explained about the incident and the sound of silk in the dining room, and Suki presently dismissed this, saying, "I wonder you are so easily frightened. I would fain see what would frighten me." At that very moment, loud knocking began under the table nearby. She took the candle to investigate, but could find nothing. Within seconds, the iron casement window frame began to clatter, along with the lid of a bed warming pan. The latch of the door incessantly moved up and down. This catalogue of events frightened Suki so much, she leapt into bed without undressing, pulled the cover over her head, and refused to look out until the following morning. Just 2 nights later, around 9 p.m, Hetty, a year younger than Molly, was waiting as usual to take Mr. Wesley's candle away. She heard the distinct sound of someone descend the garret staircase, walking slowly past her, then descending the best stairs, then back up the garret stairs. With every step, the entire house seemed to shake from top to bottom. Hetty took Mr. Wesley's candle and ran to her bed as fast as she could. The next day, she told her elder sister Emily, who said, "You know, I believe none of these things. Pray, let me take away the candles tonight, and I will find out the trick." That evening, she took her father's candle, but immediately heard a noise from downstairs. She rushed down to the kitchen, where she could hear drumming on the inside of the screen. She walked around the screen, and the drumming started on the outside. It was always on the opposite side to her. Then a knocking commenced on the kitchen's back door. She approached the door and locked it quietly, and as the knocking started again, she suddenly opened the door. There was nothing to be seen. She shut the door, and the knocking began again. The door violently thrust open against her. As she tried to close it once more, it seemed she was battling an invisible force. In the end, she used her knee, shoulder and body weight to force the door closed and locked it quickly. The knocking began again. She went up to bed, but this incident convinced her there was no imposter involved with the activity. The following morning, Emily told her mother Susanna what had happened. Susanna replied, "If I hear anything, I shall know how to judge." Just a few hours later, Emily begged her mother to come into the nursery. This she duly did, and both heard in the corner of the room the violent rocking of a wooden cradle. But no cradle had been in the nursery for years. Susanna was convinced it was preternatural and began to pray that it would not materialise in her own chamber at night time. Everyone residing in the house, except for Samuel Wesley, heard the knocking, which grew in intensity and frequency. Susanna Wesley had not discussed the incidents with her husband, but felt she had to disclose the mysterious events before things got out of control. His reaction was one of anger, disbelief, and he blamed Suki for scaring her siblings. The Wesley girls were upset that their father didn't believe them and desperately wanted their father to experience the poltergeist firsthand. Their desire was speedily granted. The following night, 9 loud knocks were heard directly next to Reverend Samuel Wesley's bed. He was unable to find any evidence to account for the noises. The next evening, at 6 o'clock, Samuel Wesley and the family had prayers as usual. As he began the prayer for the king, a knocking began throughout the room, and a thunderous knock accompanied the Amen. This continued every morning and evening whilst the prayer for the king was said. John Wesley, writing after his parents were deceased, explained, "As both my father and mother are now at rest, and incapable of being pained thereby, I think it my duty to furnish the serious reader with a key to this circumstance. The year before King William died, my father observed my mother did not say Amen to the prayer for the king. She said she could not, for she did not believe the Prince of Orange was king. He vowed he would never cohabit with her until she did. He then took his horse and rode away, nor did she hear anything from him for a 12-month. He then came back and lived with her as before, but I fear his vow was not forgotten before God. Emily Wesley named the invisible force Old Geoffrey after an old man who passed away in the rectory before the Wesleys had moved in. More mysterious events occurred. The family heard bottles smashing in the pantry, but on inspection, everything was found orderly and intact. Various members of the Wesley family started to see strange figures within the rectory itself. A number of residents, including servants, were startled to see a strange old man in a white gown. Hetty reported to her parents that she had seen something like a man in a loose nightgown that trailed behind him, who drifted down the stairs whilst she was waiting for her father. She was so terrified she fled from the scene. Mrs. Wesley observed a phantom that looked like a badger without a head beneath one of the girls' beds. It seemed to vanish under one of her daughter Emily's petticoats. Robert Brown claimed to have seen a white rabbit dart out of the kitchen's fire. He witnessed it initially in the dining room and had chased it by candlelight, but it ran past him through the hall and under the stairs. Susanna Wesley continued to hear noises about her bedchamber and reported to her son John in a letter. One night, it made such a noise in the room over our head as if several people were walking, then ran up and down the stairs, and was so outrageous that we thought the children would be frightened, so your father and I rose and went down to light a candle. Just as we came to the bedroom at the bottom of the broad stairs, having hold of each other, on my side there seemed as if somebody had emptied a bag of money at my feet, and on his, as if all the bottles under the stairs, which were many, had been dashed to 1,000 pieces by a large iron ball. However, when they checked the bottles, they were all intact. On another occasion, Mr. Wesley shouted, "Suki, do you not hear? All the pewter is thrown about in the kitchen." But when they looked, all the pewter was in place. The Wesleys contacted Mr. Joseph Hoole, the rector from nearby Hacksey, to act as an independent witness. He witnessed loud knockings at 2 a.m. on a headboard, and a mysterious noise that sounded like a carpenter planing wood, and thunderous knocking sounds in the nursery. Frequently, the entity would knock 3 times, then 3 times more, and this would continue for hours on end. The younger members of the Wesley family would often sleep through the nightly antics, and would sometimes treat old Geoffrey as a friend, chasing the knockings from room to room. But these disturbances took a toll on the older members of the family. Frequently, the noises across the house were so violent and loud, the family couldn't get to sleep until 4 in the morning. One wrote, "It was beyond the power of any human creature to make such strange and various noises." One of the maids had been so disturbed after hearing an unearthly voice, like somebody dying nearby, that she refused to move from one room to another by herself. The family dog, a large mastiff, appeared to sense old Geoffrey and would suddenly bark and leap at the invisible presence. In time, the dog became somewhat fearful and would retreat, whining and shaking, to a hiding place under the stairs. Once it had settled, the knocking and banging would commence. One night, Samuel Wesley, exasperated by the impact of old Geoffrey on his family, drew his pistol in his daughter's bedroom and challenged the invisible presence to face him, man to man, in his study. Bellowing out that it was a deaf and dumb devil, he bade it cease annoying his family. The following evening, the usually tranquil study reverberated with the poltergeist's intense knocking. Wesley began to speculate that old Geoffrey was an agent of evil, sent to test the family's faith. Wesley attempted to communicate with the poltergeist by tapping on the wall and floor with his cane. He'd provide a number of taps on the wall, which the spirit would then repeat. He'd follow the poltergeist into various rooms, and sometimes would sit alone, the door firmly shut, and ask it what it wanted. He never got an audible, coherent answer, just louder knocking. It appeared that old Geoffrey was increasing in power and strength. Samuel Wesley and Mr. Hoole were both roughly shoved by the entity as they sat talking one evening, and on a number of occasions the beds were seen to levitate off the floor. One evening, Nancy was playing cards with her sister when the bed on which she was sat lifted suddenly from the ground. Nancy leapt to the floor, but her sisters persuaded her to resume the game. As she sat down, the bed lifted several times successively to a considerable height. After this, Nancy refused to sit on the bed and left the room. Mr. Wesley kept a diary of events and recorded that he was thrice pushed by an invisible power, once against the corner of my desk in the study, a second time against the door of the matted chamber, and a third time against the right side of the frame of my study door. Friends and neighbours were worried for the Wesleys and suggested they should move, but Wesley was resolute and determined. He refused to back down. "Let the devil flee from me. I will not flee from the devil," were Wesley's words. And with these words, at the end of January 1717, the outbursts that had been the Wesleys' 2-month nightmare ceased. The last recorded appearance of old Geoffrey was written by Emily, who wrote, "The sprite was with us last night, and heard by many of our family." The ordeal of old Geoffrey was over. I hope you enjoyed this rather old tale of the haunting of Epworth Rectory. It seems this is a case that divides opinion in the paranormal world. It's an interesting and historic case, so I thought we'd have a little look at some of the different opinions here. And I'd absolutely love to know your thoughts on this case, for sure. Some firmly believe that Samuel Wesley's resolute defiance of the entity triumphed, and that whatever old Geoffrey was, it was crushed by Wesley's own determination. And some people think that this was a hoax perpetrated by Wesley's political and religious enemies who were trying to drive the Wesleys away from the area. But if they were desperate to get rid of the Wesleys, why did they give up after only 2 months? Is the poltergeist linked to trauma? After their marriage in 1688, the Wesleys had 19 children, but 9 of them died in infancy. 4 of those who died were twins, and a maid accidentally smothered one of the children. The Wesleys' original rectory home at Epworth burned down in 1709, and their 5-year-old son was rescued from the flames. But when the rectory was rebuilt and refurnished, it was at great personal cost to Samuel Wesley, who remained in debt until his death in 1735, and was twice sent to a debtor's prison. So could there have been marital tensions over finance in the household? The Wesleys' eldest daughter, Emily, believed the incidents were supernatural in origin, and she wrote, "I believe it is witchcraft for these reasons. About a year since, there was a disturbance in a town near us that was undoubtedly witches, and if so near, why may they not reach us? Then my father, who had for several Sundays before its coming, preached warmly against consulting those that are cunning men, which our people are given to. They have had a particular spite at my father." Records do show that there were witch trials in Lincolnshire in the previous century, and it was not uncommon for people to be extremely superstitious. Indeed, Susanna Wesley connected old Geoffrey with the fate of her brother, who, whilst working for the East India Company, disappeared and was never heard of again. And 4 of the daughters, Susanna, Emily, Mary and Anne, all had no doubt that the whole affair with old Geoffrey was supernatural. It was the Wesley's son John who collated the family's written experiences, as he had an interest in the paranormal, and he was very much convinced that this was a paranormal event, and he firmly believed that these events came from Satan as a punishment for Samuel Wesley parting from his pregnant wife for 12 months over a row about the king. Whilst the family members were happy to assist, there was one member whose experiences were never chronicled, and that was his sister, Hetty. Skeptics for many years have suggested that the finger of blame must be pointed at Hetty. They see this lack of testimony and absence of Hetty's account is evidence enough that the 19-year-old was to blame. And Hetty was very literate and went on to be a poet and a writer, and one might assume that she would have been able to construct a very credible and passionate account of the events. And much of the activity did focus on Hetty. Did old Geoffrey manifest around Hetty more than anyone else? Hetty heard the noises on the stairs whilst waiting for her father's candle and witnessed the man in the white nightdress. Could she have influenced the servants to corroborate her testimony? Having said this, in Hetty's defence, one of her sisters wrote in her account, "The noise never followed me, as it did my sister Hetty. I have been with her when it has knocked under her. When she moved, it has followed and still kept under her feet." Susanna Wesley wrote that on a number of occasions Hetty had been witnessed to shake and tremble in her sleep, and that she believed this was a symbol that the phantom knocking events of old Geoffrey were on their way, and the knockings would actually wake Hetty up. Is it possible, as some critics have suggested, that Hetty managed to create a sophisticated system of strings, pulleys and weights that she manipulated without the family members noticing, resulting in the strange knocking sounds? Did she use the opportunity to rebel against her strict upbringing? If really we're talking about pulleys and things, it would have to be extremely sophisticated to fool her family members as well as the servants, I would imagine. I'm not convinced I buy that story at all. And what about the shoving that Samuel Wesley and Mr. Hoole felt? How might she have masterminded such an action? And how can we blame Hetty for the reaction of the dog? Animals can be very sensitive to paranormal activity, as we've seen in a number of previous videos, and I know a number of viewers feel their pets are very much in tune with the spirit world. Is this a genuine poltergeist that somehow has attached itself to Hetty in particular? Did she not chronicle her experiences as they were too traumatic for her to record? Journalist and psychologist Addington Bruce wrote in his book Historic Ghosts and Ghost Hunters in 1909 that the earliest records that document the haunting at Epworth have large discrepancies from later reports. According to Bruce, the original records from the 18th century reduced the haunting to nothing more than some alleged creaking noises, knocks, footsteps and groaning sounds. He believed that Hetty had produced the phenomena fraudulently, but it is important to recognise that Bruce was generally sceptical of poltergeist cases, concluding that they are best explained by fraud and psychological factors such as hallucination or suggestion. And he wrote about Hetty, "There can then be little question that Hetty Wesley was precisely the type of girl to derive amusement by working on the superstitious fears of those about her," which may be a little bit judgmental. Samuel Taylor Coleridge suggested that the Epworth haunting was a contagious hallucination, but the poet laureate Robert Southey believed it was demonic. And another thing to note is that in the 1800s it seems old Geoffrey made a return and the rector of Epworth was forced to leave the parsonage, so perhaps he still resides there in some shape or form. There is a legendary tale of a murder connected with the rectory at Epworth, and it is said that many years earlier, a maid, whilst in bed one night, was startled by a man who had managed to crawl into the house. Terrified that she should do something, she is said to have grabbed a meat cleaver that lay nearby, struck a blow to the man's head, and that she fell to the floor with a shriek and unconscious with fright. Mr. Wesley awoke, and believing the house was being robbed, he grabbed a pair of fire irons and began to shout and scare the men off. The injured man was rescued by his fellow robbers, and a trail of blood showed where the man had been dragged. But then the trail stopped and the man and the culprits were never located. So all sorts of theories really. I'd love to know what you think. Do you think that this is a genuine poltergeist? Do you think it was a hoax? I really hope you enjoyed the video and I'd love to know what you think about the haunting of Epworth Rectory. As always, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and feel free to comment below, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care, guys.